If you look closely at the side of a large ship, you might notice something that seems almost decorative: long painted lines running across the hull. Some sit close to the water, others appear higher up, and their positions can look strangely deliberate. They aren't there simply to make a ship look more interesting. In fact, these markings are connected to one of the most important questions sailors and engineers have to answer: how much of a ship should actually be sitting in the water? So why do ships have strange painted lines on their hulls? To understand why, we first need to look at what happens when a massive vessel meets the sea. Let's get into it, right here, on History of Simple Things. A ship may look enormous from the outside, but what matters to its designers is not simply its size. What matters is how much weight it is carrying and how deeply that weight pushes the vessel into the water. A ship floats because it displaces enough water to produce an upward buoyant force equal to its weight. Add cargo, fuel, fresh water, equipment, or passengers, and the ship becomes heavier, causing it to sit lower. Remove that weight, and it rises higher. This is why the same vessel can have noticeably different water lines at different times. For a cargo ship, the difference can be especially dramatic because thousands of tons may be loaded or unloaded during a single trip. The position where the water meets the hull is therefore not permanently fixed. A ship leaving port with relatively little cargo may ride noticeably higher than it does after being loaded for a long voyage, but there is a limit to how deeply it can safely sit. If too much weight is added, less of the hull remains above the water, reducing the vessel's reserve buoyancy and potentially affecting stability, maneuverability, and freeboard. The situation also changes depending on the water itself. Freshwater is less dense than seawater, so a ship displaces a greater volume of fresh water to support the same weight. Temperature can also affect water density. These changes are small compared with loading differences, but for large ships, small differences can still matter. That creates a practical problem. A crew cannot simply look at the hull and guess whether a vessel is carrying a safe amount of weight. They need a reliable visual reference showing how deeply the ship is allowed to sit under particular conditions. This is where the markings on the hull become much more important. Rather than being decoration, they provide information that can be read from outside the vessel. Their position is based on calculations involving the ship's design, buoyancy, and operating conditions. The markings allow people responsible for loading and inspecting a vessel to compare the ship's actual position in the water with established limits. And this is where those seemingly strange painted lines finally start to make sense. The most famous of these markings is the load line, often associated with the Plimsoll Line. It developed from a major problem in 19th century shipping, when concerns grew over vessels being overloaded and crews being placed in dangerous conditions. British politician Samuel Plimsoll became strongly associated with efforts to regulate loading, and the Merchant Shipping Act of 1876 introduced requirements for load line markings on British ships. Over time, international rules developed, eventually leading to the modern International Convention on Load Lines, adopted through the International Maritime Organization. The marking typically consists of a horizontal line with a series of additional lines and letters. Together, they indicate the maximum permitted loading conditions for the vessel under different circumstances. The reason there can be several lines is that ships do not operate under identical conditions everywhere. Different types of water and different seasons can affect how much a vessel may safely load. The familiar load line symbol includes separate marks associated with conditions such as tropical seawater, summer seawater, winter seawater, and winter North Atlantic conditions. There is also a freshwater mark because freshwater provides less buoyant force for the same displaced volume than seawater. The vessel's permitted draft changes accordingly. In simple terms, the marks create a set of boundaries rather than one universal line. If the water reaches the appropriate mark, the ship has reached its regulated loading limit for those conditions. Today, these markings are part of a much larger system of ship safety. A vessel's loading condition is carefully calculated, and its draft can be checked using draft marks placed near the bow, stern, or both. The load line itself is assigned and verified under applicable maritime regulations and surveys. It is not simply something a crew paints wherever they want. If a ship is overloaded beyond its permitted mark, the consequences can include reduced freeboard, increased exposure to waves, poorer handling, and less margin for unexpected conditions. The markings also communicate information visually to inspectors, port authorities, and crews without requiring them to climb aboard and inspect the ship's cargo. Once you know what those lines are for, they change the way you see a ship. The markings may look like simple paint from a distance, but they represent calculations about weight, water density, freeboard, weather, and the limits of the vessel itself. They are a reminder that a ship's relationship with the water is constantly changing, even when the vessel appears completely still. Every cargo load, every fuel tank, and every change in water conditions can alter where that enormous hull sits. So the next time you see those strange lines along a ship's side, they are not random decoration. They are visible boundaries showing just how much of the ocean a ship can safely carry. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.